My name is Madison. I'm 22 years old, and I've always been the invisible daughter in my family. Last month, my dad delivered an ultimatum: attend my perfect sister Heather's wedding or lose my college tuition completely. What my family doesn't know is that while they think I'm barely passing my classes, I'm actually graduating at the top of my class. I've kept my success secret for years, but I'm finally ready to show them who I really am. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to follow my journey of finally standing up for myself. Growing up as the younger sister of Heather Matthews was like living in permanent shadow. From the moment she was born, my sister was the golden child, the standard against which I was constantly measured and found lacking. Heather, now 28, was everything my parents valued: poised, socially adept, conventionally beautiful, and seemingly effortless in her achievements. I remember when I was 10 years old, I had worked for weeks on my science fair project about renewable energy. It won first place in the district competition, a significant achievement that might have made any parent proud. The award ceremony was scheduled for 7 in the evening, and I had reminded my parents, Richard and Eleanor Matthews, repeatedly. They had promised they would be there. "We'll try our best, Madison," my mother had said that morning, but there was a hesitation in her voice that I'd already learned to recognize. That evening, I stood alone on the stage clutching my blue ribbon, scanning the audience for my parents' faces, only to find empty seats where they should have been. Later, I learned they had attended Heather's dance recital instead, which had been scheduled at the last minute. "Heather needed us there," my father explained when I confronted them with tears in my eyes. "This was her big solo performance. There will be other science fairs for you." But there weren't other ceremonies for me, because after a while, I stopped telling them about my achievements altogether. High school brought new challenges when I began struggling academically. Reading assignments took me twice as long as my classmates, and numbers seemed to jumble themselves on the page when I tried to solve math problems. It wasn't until junior year that a particularly attentive teacher suggested I might have dyslexia. The diagnosis explained my difficulties, but my parents saw it as confirmation of what they already believed: that I wasn't as naturally gifted as Heather. "Not everyone can be an academic superstar," my father said after a particularly difficult parent-teacher conference. "Some people just have to work harder. That's life, Madison." His words cut deeper than he knew. My mother, Eleanor, would occasionally show flashes of guilt about the disparity in how they treated us, but these moments of awareness never translated into actual change. She remained a passive enabler of my father's blatant favoritism. "Your father just wants what's best for both of you," she would say when I complained about the unfairness. "Heather just needs different support than you do." Different support apparently meant different levels of attention, praise, and financial backing. When Heather graduated college with honors in business, my parents threw an extravagant party at our home. I was in my senior year of high school then, struggling with college applications and my newly diagnosed learning disability. "We're so proud to announce that we'll be fully funding Heather's MBA program at Wharton," my father announced during his toast, champagne glass raised high. Then he turned to me, an afterthought. "And hopefully Madison will find her way through undergraduate studies, wherever she ends up going." The room had laughed, and I had smiled weakly, playing along with the family narrative that I was the underachiever, the disappointment. That night, after the guests had left and the house had quieted, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. "Do you think Madison will even finish college?" my father asked, his voice tinged with resignation. "Richard, that's not fair," my mother replied, but her protest was half-hearted at best. "I'm just being realistic, Eleanor. The girl has limited potential. We need to accept that and help her find something suitable for her capabilities." I stood frozen in the hallway, their words washing over me like ice water. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I decided that if they had already determined my worth, I would no longer seek their approval. Instead, I would work twice as hard, push twice as far, but I would do it in secret. I would let them believe what they wanted while building a reality they couldn't imagine. The only person who ever saw beyond the family narrative was my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister. Unlike my parents, Aunt Patricia actually asked me questions about my interests and listened to my answers. "You know, Madison," she told me once when I was helping her garden during a family gathering while everyone else was inside fawning over Heather's new promotion, "I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your age. This quiet determination. You're not showy about it, but you've got grit." Her words were like water in a desert, and I found myself blinking back tears as I dug my fingers into the soil. "Your parents might not see it yet," she continued, "but you're going to surprise everyone someday. Just keep going." And so I developed my coping mechanism. I would appear average to avoid disappointment, while excelling privately. I learned to deflect questions about my grades with vague responses. I stopped bringing friends home to avoid the inevitable comparisons to Heather. I became an expert at being overlooked, which paradoxically gave me the freedom to pursue excellence on my own terms. By the time I started college at State University, the pattern was firmly established. My parents had minimal expectations for me, which meant minimal interest in my college experience. They paid my tuition because it was the right thing to do, as my father put it, but beyond that financial obligation, they remained focused on Heather's dazzling career trajectory at a prestigious marketing firm, her perfect relationship with her boyfriend Jason, and the life milestones she was hitting right on schedule. And all the while, I was building a different story for myself, one they knew nothing about. The call from my father came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was walking back from my advanced algorithm design class. The screen lit up with "Dad," and I briefly considered letting it go to voicemail, but habit and a lingering desire for approval made me answer. "Madison," he began without preamble, "Heather's wedding date is set for May 15th. That's the weekend before your finals, according to the university calendar I checked." I was momentarily stunned that he had actually looked up my school schedule, before realizing it was only to ensure I had no excuse not to attend. "I need you to confirm you'll be there," he continued. "Your sister wants all the bridesmaids to arrive 3 days before for rehearsals and pre-wedding events." "Dad, I hesitated, thinking about the critical project presentation I had scheduled that Thursday, not to mention my own graduation ceremony they didn't even know about. "That's really close to finals, and I have some important—" He cut me off before I could finish. "Madison, this is non-negotiable. This is your sister's wedding. The biggest day of her life." "I understand that, but—" "No buts." His voice hardened in the way that had always made me shrink as a child. "Let me be clear. If you choose not to attend your sister's wedding, I will consider it a personal insult to this family, and I will stop paying your tuition immediately. Your choice." My heart hammered in my chest. "You'd really do that? Cut me off completely?" In a heartbeat, he replied without hesitation. "Family comes first, Madison. It's time you learned that. This isn't like one of your little science projects you can just skip out on. This is real life." The casual dismissal of my academic commitments as little science projects sent a wave of nausea through me. My hands began to shake, and I felt sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool spring air. "I have to go to class," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. "Just be there, Madison. Don't disappoint your sister. Or me." He hung up without waiting for my response. I stumbled to a nearby bench and collapsed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My breathing came in short, sharp gasps as tears burned behind my eyes. The familiar feeling of being insignificant, of having my needs dismissed, washed over me like an old, painful friend. My mind flashed back to Heather's engagement party 6 months earlier. I had driven 4 hours from campus on a weekend when I should have been completing a crucial research assignment. I arrived at the upscale restaurant my parents had rented out for the occasion, wearing the nicest dress I owned, which still paled in comparison to everyone else's attire. For 3 hours, I stood awkwardly at the periphery of conversations, nursing the same glass of champagne while watching my parents orbit around Heather and Jason like proud satellites. When it came time for family photos, my mother had to call my name twice because the photographer had started arranging the group without me. The most telling moment came when Jason, my soon-to-be brother-in-law, approached me at the bar. "I'm sorry, are you a friend of Heather's from work?" he asked politely. I stared at him in disbelief.
I'm Megison.
Her sister. Recognition dawned slowly on his face.
Oh,
Right, of course.
sorry about that.
I think we met at Christmas last year. We had actually met 6 times over the 2 years he and Heather had been dating. My own sister's fiancé couldn't recognize me. That said everything about how often I came up in their conversations, how little I factored into their lives. Back in my dorm room that evening after my father's call, I paced the small space between my desk and bed while my roommate Kimberly watched with concern. "He can't actually cut off your tuition," she insisted. "That's financial abuse." "You don't know my dad," I replied, biting at my thumbnail, a nervous habit I thought I'd outgrown. "He absolutely would. He sees money as the only real power he has over me at this point." "But what about your presentation? And graduation? Can't you just go for the actual wedding day and skip the other stuff?" I shook my head. "You heard him. 3 days of bridesmaid duties before the wedding. And knowing Heather, she'll have every minute scheduled." Kimberly sat cross-legged on her bed, her psychology textbook forgotten beside her. "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? I had worked so hard to become financially independent after graduation. My job offer from Meridian Tech was contingent on my graduation, which was set to happen the week after Heather's wedding. If I lost my tuition funding now, I'd be unable to complete my degree, which meant losing the job, the apartment I'd already put a deposit on, everything. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Please don't fight your father on this, Madison. We need family harmony right now. Heather is under so much stress with the wedding planning. Just come and be supportive. That's all we're asking." All they were asking was for me to continue playing the role they had assigned me, the lesser daughter, the afterthought, the one whose time and commitments meant nothing compared to Heather's. "I'll go," I finally told Kimberly, my voice hollow. "I don't have a choice right now." But as I spoke the words, I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out a folder hidden beneath my textbooks. Inside were the awards, the dean's list certificates, the letter confirming my selection as valedictorian, and the job offer that would finally set me free. "I'll go," I repeated, with more resolution this time. "But it won't be the way they expect." My secret academic journey began during my sophomore year of college. I had started as an education major because my father insisted it was practical for someone like you and would give me something to fall back on. The subtext was clear. Teaching was an acceptable career for someone with my supposedly limited abilities. But during that first year, I took an introductory computer science course as an elective and discovered I had not only an aptitude for coding but a genuine passion for it. The structured nature of programming languages bypassed many of the challenges my dyslexia presented with traditional reading, and the problem-solving aspects engaged my mind in ways no other subject had before. Professor Miranda Thompson noticed my work and asked me to stay after class one day. "Madison, your project solution was elegant," she said, gesturing to my code on her computer screen. "You approached the problem differently than I've seen before. Have you considered majoring in computer science?" When I explained my situation, including my dyslexia and my parents' low expectations, she didn't dismiss my concerns, but didn't accept them as immutable either. "Learning differences often correlate with unique thinking patterns that can be tremendously valuable in this field," she said. "And as for your parents, sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission." That conversation changed the trajectory of my life. I switched my major the next day, but told no one in my family. When they asked about my classes during our infrequent phone calls, I spoke vaguely about education theory and student development. Meanwhile, I was diving deep into algorithms, data structures, and systems architecture. To make it work financially, I took a night shift job at the campus library. 4 nights a week, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., I shelved books and monitored the quiet study spaces while using slow periods to complete my coursework. The schedule was punishing. There were mornings I found myself crying from exhaustion in the shower, only to pull myself together and head to my 8 a.m. class. But the results spoke for themselves. I made the dean's list every semester, earning a perfect 4.0 GPA that I couldn't share with anyone except my academic advisor and Professor Thompson, who had become my mentor. During the spring semester of my junior year, I was alone in a bathroom stall, silently crying after seeing the newest dean's list posted with my name at the top, when I heard someone enter. "Hello? Is someone in here?" A concerned voice called out. I tried to quiet my sniffling, but the person persisted. "Look, I don't want to be weird, but are you okay? Do you need help?" Something in her tone made me unlock the stall door. Standing there was Zoe Mitchell, a girl from my advanced programming class. I had admired her contributions in class discussions, but had never spoken to her directly. "Sorry," I said, wiping my eyes. "This is embarrassing." "Are you okay?" she repeated.
Yes. No.
"I don't know." I gestured helplessly toward the dean's list visible through the bathroom door. "I made top of the list again, but I can't tell anyone. My family thinks I'm barely passing my education classes, not acing computer science." Instead of looking confused or judging me, Zoe nodded slowly. "Family stuff is complicated. Want to get coffee and talk about it? I'm an excellent secret keeper." That was the beginning of my first real friendship in college. Zoe became my confidant, the one person who knew both versions of me, the struggling student my family believed in, and the academic star I actually was. In my senior year, Professor Thompson invited me to join her research team, working on an algorithmic approach to optimizing emergency response systems. The project combined technical challenges with real-world impact, and I threw myself into it completely. "This distribution model you've designed," Professor Thompson said after reviewing my contribution, "it's revolutionary. We need to submit this to the National Computing Conference." I panicked at first, but my name would be on it. My parents might find out. She gave me a long look. "Madison, at some point, you'll have to decide if hiding your light is worth the peace it brings." I decided to take the risk. Our paper was accepted, and though my parents never discovered it, the publication caught the attention of several tech companies. By early spring of my senior year, I had 5 job offers, including the dream position at Meridian Tech that I eventually accepted. Around the same time, I received an email from the dean of the computer science department that nearly stopped my heart. "Congratulations, Madison Matthews. Based on your academic performance and faculty recommendations, you have been selected as this year's valedictorian for the computer science department." I stared at the email for so long the screen went dark. Valedictorian. The highest academic honor, and no one who supposedly loved me had any idea. That same week, I received my acceptance to Stanford's graduate program in artificial intelligence with a full scholarship. It was everything I had worked for, the culmination of years of secret striving, and I had no one to share it with except Zoe and Professor Thompson. I had managed to reduce my dependency on my parents' money through scholarships, my library job, and a paid research position, but I still relied on their tuition payments to cover the gap. This necessity had kept me tethered to their expectations and their narrative about who I was. Last Christmas, I had nearly broken my silence. Sitting around the dinner table, watching my parents lavish praise on Heather for her promotion while barely acknowledging my presence, I had opened my mouth to tell them about my research publication. "Actually, I've been working on something pretty exciting too," I began. "That's nice, dear," my mother said absently, before immediately turning back to Heather. "Now tell us more about the wedding venue options. Have you and Jason decided?" The moment passed, and with it, my courage. I retreated back into invisibility, but something had shifted inside me. I was tired of being unseen, unheard, and underestimated. I just needed the right moment to reveal the truth. 2 weeks before Heather's wedding, my phone buzzed with a series of rapid-fire texts that made my stomach sink. "Madison, your bridesmaid dress needs final alterations by Saturday," Heather wrote. "Mom says you haven't scheduled your fitting yet. This is urgent." Before I could respond, another message appeared. "Also need your shoe size for the matching heels. $175. Venmo me ASAP."
Non negotiable.
And then, hair and makeup call time is 6 a.m. sharp on wedding day. Extra charge if you're late. Need your credit card for deposit. I stared at my phone, overwhelmed by the financial demands. The bridesmaid dress had already cost me $800, money I had been saving for my post-graduation move. The additional expenses Heather kept adding were stretching my budget to the breaking point, but I knew better than to complain. The dress fitting the following Saturday was an exercise in humiliation. Heather had chosen identical dusty rose gowns for her 7 bridesmaids, all of whom were her sorority sisters except for me. The style, with its low back and fitted silhouette, had been selected without any consideration for my comfort or body type. We might need to take it in more at the bust, Heather remarked as I stood on the pedestal surrounded by mirrors. Everyone else fills it out better. One of her friends, Ashley, giggled behind her hand. And maybe we can add some padding? For balance. Heather continued, circling me like a fashion critic evaluating a failed runway look. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that I only needed to get through this for my future. Later that afternoon, Heather pulled me aside to review the wedding schedule she had created. So I've made some adjustments to the family photo arrangements, she said, showing me a detailed spreadsheet on her tablet. You'll be in the back row for most of the extended family shots. The back row? But I'm your only sister, I pointed out. Heather had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I know, but Ashley and Jessica are the same height, and they'll balance the front row better with Mom and Dad. It's an aesthetic thing, Madison. Nothing personal. But it was personal. Everything about this wedding was designed to highlight Heather's perfect life and relegate me to the background, just as our family dynamic had always done. The tension escalated further at the family dinner the night before the rehearsal. My parents had rented a private dining room at an upscale restaurant, and the conversation revolved entirely around wedding details and Heather's recent achievements. Oh, before I forget, Heather announced as dessert was being served, we've had to make some changes to the reception program. Madison, we won't have time for your bridesmaid's speech after all. I looked up from my barely touched chocolate cake.
What?
But you asked me to prepare something. I know, and I'm sure it would have been nice, Heather said, her tone suggesting the opposite. But Jason's college roommate is flying in from London specifically for the wedding, and he's a professional public speaker. It makes more sense to give him that slot. My father nodded approvingly. Good decision, princess. Keep the quality of the program high. Speaking of programs, I said, attempting to change the subject, my graduation is the weekend after the wedding. I'd love it if you could all come. My father laughed dismissively. Let's focus on one event at a time, Madison. Besides, we have to check if it conflicts with Heather and Jason's honeymoon send-off brunch. It's just that it's important to me and— Did you pass everything? My father interrupted. That's the main thing. No summer classes needed this time. The assumption that I might be failing cut deep, especially since I was about to graduate as valedictorian. But I swallowed my response and nodded. I'm passing, I said quietly, the understatement of my academic career. After dinner, my mother pulled me into the ladies' room for a private chat. Madison, honey, she began, reapplying her lipstick in the mirror, I need you to promise me you won't cause any problems this weekend. What do you mean by problems? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. You know, making things about you, bringing up sensitive subjects, creating tension. She turned to face me. This is Heather's special time. She deserves all our support and attention. When has anything ever been about me? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. My mother sighed. See, that attitude right there. That's what I'm talking about. Can you just be happy for your sister without making it about your issues with the family? I wanted to scream that I had legitimate grievances, not issues, but instead, I promised to behave. The conversation left me feeling hollow and invisible, as always. On my way back to the table, I overheard Heather and Jason talking around the corner. God, I hope Madison doesn't embarrass me during the wedding, Heather was saying. Did you see what she's wearing tonight? And she still hasn't done anything with her hair. Is she still struggling with school? Jason asked. Your dad mentioned something about her barely scraping by. Heather laughed. Madison's always been the family disappointment. Academic probation last year, from what Mom told me. Not everyone gets the brains in the family, I guess. Their words froze me in place. Academic probation? I had never been anything less than exceptional in my studies. The lie my parents had apparently told about me, and that Heather so readily believed and shared, was the ultimate dismissal of my worth. But the final straw came the next morning when I accidentally discovered a receipt in my mother's purse while looking for car keys. It was from the wedding venue, showing a payment of $50,000 from my parents as a wedding gift contribution to Heather and Jason.
$52,000.
Just months earlier, when I had asked for help buying textbooks for my final semester, my father had claimed they were stretched thin and could only spare $100. The disparity was so stark, so blatant, that something broke inside me. I retreated to my old bedroom in my parents' house, where I was staying for the wedding weekend, and called the one person who had always seen me clearly. "Aunt Patricia? I need your advice," I said when she answered. "I don't think I can do this anymore." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I drove back to campus and found myself in the quiet of the university library. At 2 a.m, the building was nearly empty, just a few dedicated students preparing for finals. I sat at my usual desk by the window overlooking the central quad and tried to make sense of the emotions churning inside me. For years, I had accepted my family's narrative about who I was. I had hidden my accomplishments to avoid disrupting their comfortable perception. But at what cost? I had become complicit in my own erasure. Professor Thompson's words from earlier that year echoed in my mind. We had been discussing my future plans, and I had expressed hesitation about taking the prestigious job offer without my family's knowledge. "Madison," she had said, leaning forward across her desk, "in professional settings, you will encounter people who underestimate you, who try to define your worth based on their limited perception. The most important skill you can develop is the ability to stand in your truth regardless of others' opinions." She had fixed me with her penetrating gaze. "Your family may never see you clearly. That's their limitation, not yours. But you have a responsibility to yourself not to shrink to fit their small vision of you." Sitting in the quiet library, I realized she was right. I had been shrinking myself, making myself small enough to fit into the box my family had built for me. It was time to break out. The next morning, I met with the dean to confirm my attendance at graduation. Yes, I would be giving the valedictorian address. Yes, I would be accepting the department award for innovation. No, my family would not be attending. The dean looked concerned, but didn't press the issue. With my academic affairs in order, I turned to my financial independence. I signed and returned the formal job offer from Meridian Tech, confirming my start date for the month after graduation. The salary they offered would allow me to support myself completely, ending my financial dependence on my parents. Next, I finalized the lease on an apartment near the Meridian campus, putting down the security deposit from my savings. It was a small studio, nothing fancy, but it would be mine, a space where I could finally exist without apology. My hands shook as I completed each of these tasks, but with each signature, each confirmation email, I felt more resolved. I was building a foundation for myself that couldn't be threatened or taken away. That evening, I gathered my evidence. I organized my academic awards, printed copies of my transcript showing my perfect GPA, made a copy of my job offer letter, and collected the information about my full scholarship to Stanford. I placed everything in a professional portfolio, the kind used for important presentations. "Are you sure about this?" Zoe asked when I explained my plan to her and my friend Lucas over coffee. "It's going to cause a major rift with your family." "The rift is already there," I replied. "They just don't know it yet, because I've been pretending everything is fine." Lucas, who had met my family once during Parents' Weekend and had been appalled by their treatment of me, nodded supportively. "You need to do this, Madison, for your own self-respect." We spent the next hour role-playing different scenarios. How I would respond if my father threatened me. What I would say if Heather accused me of ruining her wedding. How to handle my mother's inevitable tears. "Remember to breathe," Zoe advised. "And remember that no matter how they react, their response doesn't define your worth." Back in my dorm room, my roommate Kimberly helped me prepare mentally for the confrontation. "Visualize yourself standing strong," she suggested, drawing on her psychology training. "See yourself speaking your truth calmly and with confidence." We practiced breathing exercises to manage anxiety and discussed boundary-setting techniques. Kimberly, who had witnessed firsthand the toll my family's dismissal had taken on me, was fiercely supportive of my decision to finally stand up for myself. The next day, I went shopping for what would become the most important outfit of my life. I needed something appropriate for both my graduation ceremony and Heather's wedding, something that would help me feel powerful and confident. I finally selected a tailored blue dress that was formal enough for both occasions without being flashy. It was professional, elegant, and distinctly me, not something chosen to fade into the background. The night before graduation, I lay awake in my dorm room, doubt creeping in despite all my preparation. Was I making a mistake? Would this forever damage my relationship with my family? Was I being selfish by potentially disrupting Heather's wedding weekend? Tears soaked my pillow as I wrestled with these questions. Part of me, the little girl who had stood alone at the science fair clutching her blue ribbon, still desperately wanted her parents' approval. That part wanted to retreat, to apologize, to make myself small again for the sake of family peace. But by morning, as I stood before the mirror in my graduation cap and gown, I saw something different reflected back at me. I saw a young woman who had overcome not just dyslexia, but years of systematic dismissal to achieve academic excellence. I saw someone worthy of recognition, respect, and celebration. "My name is Madison Matthews," I said to my reflection, rehearsing the opening of my valedictorian speech. "And I am not who you think I am." It was time to show my family the truth. Graduation day dawned clear and bright, as if the universe approved of my decision. The ceremony was held in the university's grand amphitheater, with rows of folding chairs filling the space where 4 years earlier I had attended my first college lecture, uncertain and afraid. Now, as I took my place among the other graduates, I felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in what I had accomplished, sadness that the seats I had reserved for my family would remain empty. They didn't even know I was graduating today, let alone as valedictorian. When my name was called to approach the podium for my speech, the applause felt distant, as if happening in another room. I took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and began. 4 years ago, I arrived at this university believing what I had been told about myself, that I was someone with limited potential, someone who would need to work twice as hard to achieve half as much as others. Today, I stand before you having discovered a fundamental truth. Sometimes the greatest obstacle to our success is not our limitations, but the limitations others place upon us. As I continued my speech about perseverance and self-belief, I scanned the audience, momentarily hoping to see my parents' faces despite knowing they weren't there. Instead, I saw Professor Thompson beaming proudly, Zoe giving me a thumbs up, and dozens of classmates who had come to respect me for my work and character, not for my relationship to a perfect sibling. The diploma I received today represents more than academic achievement, I concluded. It represents the discovery of my own voice and the courage to use it. Whatever challenges you face beyond these walls, remember that you have the right to define yourself, regardless of others' expectations. Thank you. The applause as I left the stage felt like a validation not just of my words, but of my decision to finally stand in my truth. After the ceremony, I didn't linger for photographs or celebrations. I changed in a campus bathroom, carefully placing my graduation cap and honors cords in my car before driving directly to the wedding venue. According to the schedule Heather had distributed, the ceremony would begin in 2 hours, with family photos happening now. I arrived still wearing my blue dress from graduation, my diploma and portfolio of achievements tucked under my arm. The elegant country club was bustling with wedding staff, photographers, and early guests. I spotted my family gathered on the manicured lawn for pictures, Heather resplendent in her designer gown, my parents beaming beside her. When they saw me approaching, my father's expression darkened. "Madison, you're late," he hissed. "And what are you wearing? Where's your bridesmaid dress?" "I need to speak with you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Privately." "Now is not the time," he replied dismissively. "The photographer is waiting." "Go change immediately." "Richard," my mother interjected, noticing my unusual demeanor. Maybe we should hear what she has to say. Reluctantly, my father followed me to a small sitting room off the main hall. My mother trailed behind, concern etched on her face. To my surprise, Heather followed as well, her wedding gown rustling as she walked. "This better be important," she said, crossing her arms. "You're disrupting everything." Once the door closed behind us, I placed my diploma on the coffee table. "I graduated today," I said simply, "as valedictorian of the computer science department." My father stared at the diploma, confusion crossing his face. "Computer science? You're an education major." "No, I switched majors sophomore year. I've been studying computer science for the past 3 years, maintaining a 4.0 GPA and working on research that was published in the National Computing Journal." I opened my portfolio and spread out the evidence of my academic career. Dean's List certificates, research publications, academic awards, and finally, my job offer. I've accepted a position at Meridian Tech starting next month. The starting salary is $90,000 a year. I placed the offer letter on top of the pile. I've also been accepted to Stanford's graduate program with a full scholarship, which I'll be deferring for a year while I work. The room fell silent as my family processed this information. My father's face flushed red, not with pride but with anger. "You've been lying to us for years," he demanded.
No, y replía calmly.
I simply stopped sharing the truth with people who weren't interested in hearing it. When was the last time any of you asked about my studies? My interests? My achievements? My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "But why wouldn't you tell us you were doing well?" "Because every time I tried, you changed the subject to Heather. Because Dad made it clear from childhood that he didn't believe I was capable of academic success. Because it was easier for all of you to believe I was struggling than to reconsider your perception of me." Heather, still in her wedding gown, looked genuinely shocked. "Madison, I had no idea. Mom and Dad said you were on academic probation last year." I turned to my parents. "Why would you say that when it wasn't true?" My father, recovering from his initial shock, switched to defensiveness. "We were protecting you, lowering expectations so you wouldn't feel pressured to compete with your sister." "I never needed protection," I said firmly. "I needed support, recognition, equal treatment." "This is ridiculous," my father snapped. "You've been deliberately deceiving us, and now you choose your sister's wedding day for this performance? This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior we've come to expect from you." His words stung, but I stood my ground. "I chose today because you gave me an ultimatum. Attend this wedding or lose my tuition. But the fact is, I don't need your tuition anymore. I don't need anything from you anymore." "You ungrateful." My father began, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Richard, stop. Listen to what she's saying." Heather, however, was building up to one of her trademark meltdowns. "I cannot believe you're doing this today of all days. This is my wedding, my special day. And you show up late, not wearing your bridesmaid dress, and start dropping bombs about your secret life? How dare you steal my spotlight?" The raised voices had attracted attention. The door opened, and Jason, Heather's fiancé, peered in. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, taking in the tense scene.
No.
Heather cried. "Madison is trying to ruin my wedding with her drama?" Jason fully entered the room, his gaze falling on the documents spread across the table. He picked up one of my research publications, eyebrows rising as he read the title. "You wrote this?" he asked me, sounding impressed. "I saw this presented at the tech conference in Boston last fall. This is revolutionary work." His unexpected support momentarily silenced everyone in the room. Jason, who worked in tech venture capital, continued examining my credentials with growing respect. "Heather," he said gently, "your sister isn't creating drama. She's sharing some pretty incredible achievements." He turned to me. "Why wouldn't you tell anyone about this?" "Because they never asked," I replied simply. "Because in this family, I've always been defined by what I'm not. Not as pretty as Heather, not as socially adept, not as naturally gifted. It was easier to let them believe what they wanted than to constantly fight for recognition." Jason nodded thoughtfully before addressing my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, I think you might want to reconsider how you're reacting right now. Your daughter has accomplished something extraordinary, and your first instinct was to accuse her of being selfish. My father, unused to being challenged, bristled visibly. This is a family matter, Jason. You don't understand the history here. I understand enough, Jason replied, surprising everyone with his backbone. And as someone who's about to join this family, I think it's important that we start with honesty and mutual respect. In the tense silence that followed, I gathered my documents and stood up. I'm not here to ruin anything. I'll attend the wedding as a guest, not a bridesmaid. I'll sit quietly and celebrate your marriage, Heather. But I won't pretend to be less than I am anymore, not even for one more day. I looked each family member in the eye as I delivered my own ultimatum. You can acknowledge who I really am and begin building a relationship based on truth, or you can continue believing what's comfortable for you. But I won't participate in my own erasure any longer. That's my choice, and I'm making it today. With those words, I walked out of the room, leaving my family to decide what happened next. The wedding proceeded despite the family drama, though not exactly as planned. I sat in the back row during the ceremony, watching as Heather and Jason exchanged vows. The bride looked beautiful if slightly distracted, glancing my way several times during the service. At the reception, I found myself at a table with distant relatives who knew little about the family dynamics at play. To my surprise, several guests approached me throughout the evening, having somehow heard about my academic achievements. Your cousin mentioned you graduated as valedictorian today, my mother's cousin Barbara said, sitting down beside me. That's incredible, Madison. Tell me more about your research. These small moments of recognition from extended family members felt surreal after years of invisibility. The most unexpected support came from Aunt Patricia, who sought me out during the cocktail hour and raised her champagne glass in a private toast. To Madison, she said, her eyes shining with pride, who always had the courage to be herself, even when no one was looking. You knew, didn't you? I asked, about how things really were for me and the family. She nodded sadly. I saw it, but I failed you by not speaking up more forcefully. I thought it would change as you grew up, that they would eventually see you clearly. I'm sorry it took so long. Her apology, the first I'd received from any family member, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. As the evening progressed, I maintained a respectful distance from my immediate family. My father avoided me entirely, disappearing to the bar whenever I came into view. My mother made several awkward attempts at conversation, clearly struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the accomplished young woman before her. It wasn't until late in the reception, after several drinks had loosened his rigid demeanor, that my father approached me on the terrace where I had gone for a moment of quiet. Madison, he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I've been thinking about what happened earlier. I waited silently, unwilling to make this easy for him. I may have misjudged some things, he continued, the words clearly difficult for him. Your mother and we never meant to make you feel less important than your sister. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement I had ever received from him. But you did, I replied quietly. Every day, in 100 small ways, you showed me that my worth was less than Heather's, that my achievements were less significant, my needs less important, my future less promising. He looked away, uncomfortable with the directness of my words. We're proud of what you've accomplished. We just wish you had shared it with us. I tried, Dad, many times, but you weren't listening. He had no response to that truth, and after an awkward silence, he retreated back to the reception. It wasn't the tearful reconciliation scene from a movie, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of misunderstanding that had separated us for so long. My mother found me later as the reception was winding down. Unlike my father, she made a more genuine attempt at reconciliation. I failed you, she said simply, tears in her eyes. I saw what was happening, how differently we treated you and Heather, but I didn't have the courage to challenge it. I told myself it was just your different personalities, your different needs, but the truth is I took the easy path of going along with your father's preferences. Her honesty touched me in a way my father's halting almost apology hadn't. Thank you for saying that, Mom. It matters. Can we try again? She asked. Get to know each other as we really are, not as we've been pretending to be? I nodded cautiously. I'd like that. But it will take time, and things need to change. They will, she promised. Starting now. Heather's reaction evolved throughout the evening. Her initial anger gave way to a complicated mix of emotions: resentment at having her perfect day disrupted, confusion about the sister she thought she knew, and, eventually, a reluctant respect for what I had achieved. Just before leaving with Jason for their honeymoon suite, she pulled me aside. I still think you could have picked a better time to drop your bombshell, she said, but what you've done, it's impressive, Madison. I had no idea you were capable of all that. That's the problem, Heather. None of you had any idea what I was capable of because none of you bothered to find out. She looked genuinely taken aback by my directness. I guess I deserved that. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how I've treated you. And for what I said about you to Jason. That wasn't fair. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was something. A recognition, however small, that she had contributed to the family dynamic that had caused me so much pain. In the weeks following the wedding, I began the process of rebuilding my life on my own terms. I moved into my new apartment with help from Zoe and Lucas, not my family. The small studio became my sanctuary, the first space that was truly mine, decorated to reflect my personality rather than to meet someone else's expectations. My first day at Meridian Tech marked another milestone in my journey toward independence. Walking into the sleek office building as a valued team member, not the family disappointment, felt like stepping into a new dimension where my abilities were recognized and appreciated. Welcome to the team, Madison, my new manager said during our first meeting. We're excited to see where your innovative thinking takes us. Simple words, but they resonated deeply after years of having my potential questioned and dismissed. My relationship with my family entered a new phase, characterized by limited contact and carefully maintained boundaries. I declined Sunday dinners for the first month, giving myself space to establish my new life without their influence. When I finally did agree to visit, it was on my terms, bringing Zoe as moral support and leaving when I felt my boundaries being tested. My father struggled the most with our new dynamic. Having lost his financial leverage over me, he seemed unsure how to relate to me as an independent adult with her own accomplishments. Our conversations remained stilted, but there were moments when I caught him looking at me with what appeared to be genuine curiosity about who I had become. My mother made more consistent efforts, calling regularly and asking thoughtful questions about my work and interests. She visited my apartment, admiring the space I had created for myself and bringing a housewarming gift that showed she had been paying attention to my preferences. I've been reading about dyslexia, she told me during one visit. Trying to understand more about what you've been dealing with all these years. I wish I had done that sooner. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Perhaps the most surprising development was my continuing friendship with Jason. Despite the family tension, he reached out to discuss my research, eventually connecting me with investors interested in developing applications based on my emergency response algorithm. Heather's coming around, he confided during one of our coffee meetings. She talks about you differently now, with respect. And Dad. I couldn't help asking. Jason smiled wryly. Still processing. But he bragged about you to his golf buddies last week. Baby steps. As I settled into my new reality, I found myself thinking often about the other, invisible students I had encountered during my college years, those struggling with the weight of others' limited perceptions. This led me to volunteer as a mentor for first-generation college students with learning differences, sharing my experience and the strategies that had helped me succeed. During one mentoring session, I met Abigail, a freshman with dyslexia whose parents, like mine, didn't believe she could succeed in STEM fields. Everyone says I should switch to something easier, she confided, echoing my own past struggles. The most important thing I learned, I told her, is that your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it. Build your skills, Trust your abilities and surround yourself with people who believe in your potential. As I spoke, I realized I was finally living the advice I was giving. I had built my self-worth from within, no longer dependent on my family's approval or recognition. The journey wasn't over. There would be more difficult conversations, more boundaries to establish, more old patterns to break. But for the first time, I was moving forward as my authentic self, neither diminished by others' perceptions nor defined by their limitations. And that, more than any academic honor or professional achievement, was the true victory. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when no one believed in you? How did you find the courage to show your true abilities? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled similar family dynamics or moments when you had to choose between peace and authenticity. Don't forget to like this video if Madison's journey resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of personal triumph, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be seen for who they truly are. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' ability to recognize it.